Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be following up with, after my friend and former colleague, Alex. He introduced to you the idea of innovation and the history of innovation. And we're actually going to dive into the practical implementation of innovation in the business industry. And my particular case involves Amazon and building a wing of e-commerce business at this particular company at Book Exchange, where I was the chief data scientist. And although right now, currently I'm at SDG Group Consulting. We're going to briefly touch upon, this is our agenda, the opportunity that was presented to me at Book Exchange, the history of Book Exchange, what kind of company they do, and what do they do now and before, the data model that I had built for them. Then we're going to dive into the automation and scalability and implementation of that model. We're going to speak about hideous pitfalls and lessons learned from the business standpoint. And finally, we're going to conclude with some financial achievements of the business. A few words about myself. I have a degree in bioinformatics, and you might ask, how does bioinformatics relate to data science? What's the connection? And then they're actually very similar, because in bioinformatics you deal with a big data in bioinformatics and in biological data, but many of the methods and techniques are easily replicable and applicable in the business world at large. At Book Exchange, my primary three functions, as the name suggests, is buying and selling of college textbooks. And these books are anywhere between $50 and $350, so they're expensive books. They're textbooks that most students purchase at universities. And I was responsible for selecting which of those books to buy, what quantity to buy, and probably the most fascinating part of the business was selling these books online using Amazon and other channels. But it involved some game theory and BuyBox Secrets, as well as all the supporting tools that enable the business. And this is a fascinating part. I think anyone who plays and appreciates games will enjoy this last section. First, I want to briefly touch upon Book Exchange as a company. Who are they and what do they do? So traditionally, when I came into Book Exchange, they had a wing of wholesale business, and they were around for about 10 years. The classic model was that the clients, which are bookstores at universities, so think of them as brick and mortar stores, were requesting certain books and various quantities, and as well as the price they're willing to pay for them. And my company was fulfilling their orders. We have a supplier chain all over the world. Think of countries as far as Australia, Europe, America, Canada, even as far as Africa. And we would supply those books, and we had a lead time of 3 to 4 months, and we were able to basically supply these customers with the books that they required. And they already pre-printed the guides, the price they're willing to pay for these books. So it's a very simple model to follow, and it was a profitable business at the time. But when I came in, I opened up a new wing of business. It's e-commerce, and this is actually where the business is headed, primarily because there's a much wider and greater audience at e-commerce. And most students are now pretty savvy, and before buying books at brick and mortar stores, if you can save yourself 30 or 40% on the sticker price, they much rather buy that book on Amazon. And I led this wing. It's about 3 years old as of now. And as I mentioned, this wing uses data science as well as game theory to make it work. Now, I still remember my conversation with the CEO of the company. He entrusted me with $500,000 to buy the initial batch of books. And it was, he told me this is game time. And I had to select the books which would sell on Amazon. And at first, it's also interesting to know the evolution of this. I picked the books which are very high in demand on those guides that we just mentioned from the brick and mortar stores. So I kind of used that data to enable me to buy the books and as well as quantity. Now there's plenty of papers written on how many books do you need to buy, because unlike stocks where you can easily and readily buy and sell them, with books it's a very complicated game, because if you buy too many books, even if it's a great ROI book, you might not sell all of the books that you bought. And if you, let's say, bought 1,000 books and you only sold 100 and 900 are left, it's a big failure, because book is a depreciating commodity. And especially there's a new edition of books that come out, and the previous edition, the price of that almost goes to nothing. And the original model that was used is a logarithmic model that kind of tells you how many books to buy depending on Amazon ranking. And we're going to talk about what that means. Now, when I was just beginning this business, my initial strategy was to be, quote unquote, the cheapest seller. And I was, selling the books cheaper by 1 to 3 pennies. That's a very novice and beginner's way of doing things, but it was an interesting first step into the business just to see how I can do that. One of the interesting ideas that I implemented and enabled me to have a bigger market share was that I was selling new books in both of the categories, new and used. So many a times, the price between new and used is very similar, and you still make plenty of profit selling new books in the used category. So you didn't have to limit yourself just to new books. Now, as I was developing this wing of business, I discovered an incredible resource for anyone who's selling any product on Amazon, and it's called Keepa, Keepa.com. Why is it such a fascinating source of data? They have grandfathered relationship with Amazon where you can look at all the historical pricing of any particular item that sells on Amazon. And it's pretty much free. I want to say the subscription is about 15 euros per month. So it's an incredible resource of all the data that tells you how the products sold in the past, as well as competitors. So we're going to talk about what kind of data this Keepa provides you with. So one of the key ideas in the book industry is that it's a seasonal business. As you can imagine, books are sold primarily when the semester starts. So this is your January and August months. But interestingly enough, the books sell throughout the year at a smaller pace as well. Now, one of the interesting ideas that I subsequently have discovered is that many a time you have to predict the demand of a new edition of a book. So there's no previous history of that book, but Keepa enables you to look at the previous edition. So you almost have like a Bayesian modeling exercise with this idea. Now, one important idea to keep in mind, that even if you're a data scientist and you know how to build models, it's always important to be on top of the business in the industry. And one of the key ideas that I want to point out here is this idea of a publisher called Cengage, one of the main publishers in the book industry. And they actually, in the middle of 2018, made a pact with Amazon, which tremendously impacted the pricing of Cengage books. In effect, Cengage and Amazon got into a business relationship where Amazon allowed Cengage to rent their books in exchange for Amazon being able to buy directly from Cengage. So as you can imagine, the price of Cengage books dropped tremendously. And if you were modeling, the price of Cengage books back on older models of, let's say, year 2017 and back, your model would be tremendously off. So this is a very important idea to keep on top of the business acumen in the business. And this is an app that you can download, and it's free on any given product on Amazon. And this is what Keepa looks like, just for your information. So I'm going to quickly point out. So there's 3 distinct lines here, and you can kind of see they're historic. The orange line is the Amazon price of a book. As you can see, typically that's the highest price. Amazon tries to command a premium on the pricing because certain people only buy from Amazon and they believe Amazon, and they command a higher price. The pink line, that's the buy box. Now we're going to talk about more what the buy box means, but the buy box in short is the seller. There's many sellers selling the same book, but only one of them is in the buy box. So think of the buy box as the golden goose, and that seller sells 5 to 10 times more than any other seller. So this is the purple, and now the pink line. Now the other line that you can see a little bit below here, right over there. Oh, hold on 1 second. Let's go back. All right, so this other line is the cheapest price for new books. Now why is this important? You can see that many a time the buy box is higher than the cheapest price for a new book. And that's the premium that one commands when you win the buy box. And we're going to talk about how to get into that buy box. I just want to point out that being the cheapest is not necessarily the best idea because you're losing ROI. And lastly, the black line is the cheapest used book price. So this is a historical curve of pricing for the book. And the last line, as you can see on the very bottom, right over here, that's Amazon ranking. So this is how well this product sells on Amazon. Now let me just explain a little bit about this scale. In this scale, the smaller the number, the better it sells. So number 1 would be the most frequently bought item on Amazon in this category. And as you can see, in this particular case, it's 2,000 or 3,000 or so. This is an ordinal scale, so Amazon does not disclose the numbers of how many items sold. This is an ordinal scale of what sells the best. All right. Now, originally, Keepa provided the following variables. So just as we discussed, it provided the historical pricing on buy box, cheapest new, Amazon ranking, and cheapest used. There are additional data sources that I had to enrich the data, as whenever you data science, to provide value to the business. And those other variables included edition number. The idea why edition number of a book is valuable is, as you can imagine, if it's like a 13th or 14th edition of a book, then there's a much greater chance that this book will survive and there'll be a new edition. It's not going to be discontinued, as happens with the first edition of books. Another idea is new edition pending. So if you know that there's a new edition pending of a book, you probably don't want to buy as many of that book as you would otherwise. Key competitors, and that's very key. This business is all about the competition. Who is your competition and how to play against your competition. Publication date, publisher, as we already mentioned, Cengage is one publisher, but there's many other publishers such as McGraw, Elsevier, Pearson as some of the biggest publishers of college textbooks. Now, one important variable that's a recent part of this business is rentals. Before, rentals were non-existent. I want to say about 3 years ago when I just joined the company, there was no option to rent a book. Now, there's pretty much for every book, not want to say every book, but I want to say 70-30% of the books, there's an option to rent a book at 10 to 20% of the purchase price many a time. So rental has been a very big part of the book industry, and you obviously have to take that into account when you're building your model. There's also a room for category of the book. So we just spoke about text analytics, so this is part of that industry. where you discover what is the topic of the book. Is it a math book? Is it a geography book? Is it an anthropology book? That's very key and partial to this business. And last idea that I enrich the data with is frequent books that are bought together. Now, why is this important? As we will talk about how do you grow the business, it's important to know what other books to procure and get for the store. Now, I'm not going to get too technical into the mathematics of the model building, but basically there are two key models that were applied to this data. One of them is lasso and shade algorithms, and they were applied to discern the key variables and ratios that one needs to focus on. And I'm going to share with you some of the insights from those modeling efforts. As I already mentioned, one of the key variables, or ratios rather, to look at is the ratio of rent to the new price. So as you can imagine, if you can rent a book for $10 or buy it for $100, majority of the people are going to rent that book. So it's a book which you don't want to buy too many of. And for the books that sell well, the ratio of rentals to the purchase price is about 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. So that's your indication that this book is going to sell at a very good clip and a good velocity. Another key ratio to look at is the ratio of buying a new book versus a used book. If you can buy a new book for $200, but I can get a used book for $20 or $30, majority of the students are going to wish to buy a used book. It's not worth their time and money to get a new book. So that's another indication that this book is probably not going to sell as many units as another one. Now, one of the interesting topics and categories that I kind of discern which books sell as a topics. One of the topics that sells very poorly and only is primarily rented are anthropology, geography, and civilization type of books. These books, as you can imagine, you're not going to keep past your course, which you take at university. You're going to pretty much return it or sell it back to another student. So those topics are not well sold. Now, one of the interesting things that we're going to talk about is the idea that this Amazon ranking that Amazon provides for you accounts for all sales. That means sales that include of new books, used books, and rentals. So you don't necessarily have a clear picture. Does this book rent well? Does all the sales go to used books or new books? So one of the ideas that I had to discern was which books really sell well and how to discern that. And the insight here is that the books that sell well are reference books, are typically medical books which people keep long after they took the course at the university. Now we're going to get into the interesting part. As I already mentioned, the secret sauce of Amazon is to be in the buy box. For any given book, there are typically 20 or 30 sellers selling the very same object. So the key is, how do you get into the buy box? How do you be the seller from whom everyone kind of buys? And being in the buy box does not mean necessarily to be the cheapest seller. Many people, and myself included when I just started the business, I thought that being the cheapest, that's the key variable that was responsible for being in the buy box, and it's not. But you will see in the next few examples that there are plenty of examples where the cheapest person is not in the buy box, and being in the buy box gains you not just the velocity of sales, but also the gain in ROI. Now, how do we get there? I'm going to just challenge you and have you think about how to get there. So there's a lot of businesses that propose a general AI strategy of how to get in the buy box. But how I built my wing of business is actually more along the game theory line. So game theory hinges upon knowing your competitors and opponents specifically. And I want to kind of compare it to, imagine you're playing chess, and you're playing, let's say, against a 5-year-old or let's say a 10-year-old versus playing against a master. You're going to use the same strategy when playing the game of chess, with a 5-year-old versus a master. So that's the key idea here, is to think about that your strategy has to vary as a function of your competition. Now here's an example of an explicit book, one of the books that I used to sell. So here you see an interesting phenomenon. I just want to point out quickly some of the numbers here. So you see here the rental is $40. The used book is $60. This is the BuyBox, and the new book is $65. So this is a great example where for myself included, I actually had the book in both new and used categories. I had a much broader base of clientele, and I was able to do that because the price is very similar with used and new books. So I didn't have to just limit myself to new books. And as you can see, the rental is almost the same as new and used. It's a very small discount. So in this particular case, majority of sales are going to the new and used books. Now, one of the things that when you get into the business of doing these things, you have to be able to scale and automate, because obviously you're not going to be manually changing prices on every book by yourself. And in order to enable me to do this business, I utilize scrapers. And as I already mentioned to you, Keepa is publicly available, and it only costs 15 euros per month. There are many other scrapers that charge you an arm and a leg. They charge you literally per scrape. So don't be ripped off by other companies, but basically for sure subscribe to Keepa. Keepa nowadays keeps pretty much all of the data that you need for your analyses. And it's very, very fast. So just to give you a sense of the scrape, Keepa can scrape about 10,000 unique items in about 1 to 2 minutes. So it's very, very fast. Now, probably one of the most fascinating things in this business is the repricers. This is the tool that dynamically changes the price of your item depending upon the competition. There are many repricers available on the market today, but the key parameters of the repricer is the pricing algorithm and the speed of the repricer. Just to give you the industry standard, if you follow the pedestrian way of changing the price on Amazon using the classical API system, it's about 2.5 minutes. So it's a very, very long time. As I'm sure you know, stock prices change in milliseconds. But on Amazon, the price only changes about, on average, 2.5 minutes. So there's a tremendous opportunity in developing a repricer that's much, much faster. You'll beat the competition with the speed. And of course, the pricing algorithm of the repricer. Some of the key motivators of being in the BuyBox, as I already mentioned, you sell 5 to 10 times more inventory when you're in the BuyBox. So there's a lot of motivation to be there, and as well as ROI gains, as we saw in the picture before. You don't have to be the cheapest to win the BuyBox. Now, I'm obviously not going to be disclosing all the secrets of how to get in the BuyBox for you to win the BuyBox, but I'm just going to mention some important variables to be aware of. How many quantity on hand do you have? So if, let's say, your seller only has 3 items versus a seller has 100 items, the one that has more quantity has preference of being in the BuyBox. Your feedback as a Amazon seller has also an impact. One of the key variables is being an FBA seller versus an FBM. FBA is fulfilled by Amazon. It's a service Amazon provides and obviously charges for, but they give you an incredible boost of being in the BuyBox. So that's actually very much worth your time to be an FBA seller. The primary advantage also that I found of being an FBA seller is that you can literally send all of your inventory to Amazon. You don't have to have a huge warehouse where to host all your books. And one other key thing that I want to mention about this BuyBox formula of who's in the BuyBox, it actually depends on the Amazon rankings. So it's not a linear formula. but it's a formula as a function of the Amazon ranking. So when Amazon ranking is very high, a certain formula exists, and if it becomes lower, the value of the different variables changes as well. Now, one interesting idea I just want to share with everyone is that you don't want to be in the buy box all the time. Why is that? I actually tried to be in the buy box all the time for several of my items, and then what I saw is that Amazon crushed the price because they had too much inventory, and it literally dropped the price by 40 or 50%, and basically left all the other sellers in the dust, and I wasn't able to sell a single book until that period passed. So you basically want to share the buy box with Amazon so that it also can sell its books and it's not going to crush the price. Otherwise, you're going to be left with not being able to sell any of your product for several months. Now, one interesting thing that I just mentioned to everyone is that this business is all about game theory, and there are only about 20 active non-mom and pop active competitors. So you literally you have to study and know about 20 competitors to know your competition, and then how to compete against them. There's obviously many more sellers, but the ones that are professional and big, there are only 20. So there are other key tools that I had to use in this business. One of them is called a delimiter of quantity. So I don't want my competition knowing how many units I have for sale. Let's say I have 200 units. I can use this particular app and say that I only have 1 unit or 5 units. And this is, as you can imagine, as you compete with others, if they see they think that they only have 1 or 2, they might let you go ahead and sell first before they're going to cut the price. But with this delimiter, that is being kept secret. So this is a good, most all professional sellers use a delimiter. There's also a software that is called a feedback software that one uses to increase the number of feedback ratings. And this is just basically sending an email to a customer saying, thank you for your purchase, can you please leave a feedback for us? And that obviously builds into the buy box for you to win it, so it increases your feedback rating. One of the very important systems as well that one has to use is the inventory management supply chain. As you can imagine, as you're growing this business, your books sell, and you have to replenish your goods. So this is a very important machinery to build, because many of our suppliers are international, and there's a lead time that you have to wait for, and you have to plan and budget the time into the model. Now, one of the key ideas that I want to mention that is available with Keepa, and I actually worked very closely with Keepa, and I enabled this opportunity with Keepa, is that you now can scrape your competitors' inventory. So a lot of money went into the research and development, which books to buy. I had to spend many hours and research hours to discover what are the good books. But now you can actually, knowing your competition, you can literally scrape everything that they sell and save yourself a ton of time. And it's actually legal, and you can see what your competition sells and save yourself the research and development dollars. Now, the last idea that I want to mention is that there's a lot of graphs and tools that I use to kind of monitor during which hours of the day most of my sales happen. So literally I kind of guard my sales, and I know when to kind of turn my machinery on and be on guard. And this is kind of the heat map of when the sales happen. As you can imagine, when most people sleep, most things don't sell. You don't have to enable your top speed during those hours. Now, some of the key pitfalls and lessons learned that I want to share with everyone in my business is that there's this new option that Amazon proposed. It's basically around FBM sellers. This is a fulfilled by seller with Prime designation. So I'm sure everyone knows about Prime. Prime is very convenient. It's 2-day delivery. But why is this important is that FBM sellers with Prime designation fools many repricers, even fools the Amazon API. So basically, this seller, the FBM seller with Prime designation, can be in the buy box, and Amazon will tell you that you're actually in the buy box with FBA. Well, that's not the case. It's a certain glitch with Amazon, but for the time being, you can literally fool all other sellers and be in the buy box. and they will not know, and they will not undercut you as well. One other idea, as I mentioned to you many a time, is when you send your books in, and it's called in-transit inventory, you take a big hit with a buy box. So Amazon, as you can imagine, takes away from your buy box because the inventory is not readily available for sale. So you lose a lot of money when you send in. So you try to avoid that period of time when you're sending in your inventory. So you always want to have inventory at FBA for sale at all times, and avoid those in-transit inventory cuts in ROI. Avoid herd mentality. So most sellers, what they do is after a rush period ends, they try to dump all their inventory at marginal pricing. That's something that you want to avoid. And the idea is that when they sell out, the price jumps back up. So you don't want to sacrifice the ROI by dumping your books right after the rush. Now, one other interesting idea, even if a book has a new edition coming out, it still lasts for another 2 rush seasons. So don't be afraid to keep it for another 2 rush seasons. Don't dump it immediately. Many people believe that there's a new edition out, I have to get rid of this old edition immediately. That's not the case. The old edition still lasts for another 2 rush periods, so for another year or so. Now, one of the fascinating things that I want to end off with is a fraud case of a competitor and price manipulation. So one of the things that I was doing when I was growing this wing was I was looking at my sales, and one of the things that you need to look at is pending sales. And what I discovered is a lot of my sales, I had a lot of books that are being sold, and the transactions were not being completed. And so I discovered a competitor. What was he doing? He was buying out my inventory during rush season. He had, I think, 50 credit cards of, I think, $50,000 each. He was buying my inventory wherever we competed, selling his inventory during the rush season, and after the rush season, he would return my inventory back to me. So that's something, it's a manipulation, it's a legal practice. And I caught one of those competitors. He had 5 different accounts, but I did some Sherlock Holmes detective work and figured out who it was. We subsequently filed a lawsuit, and we won. So that's something to keep in mind. So you have to watch out for your competition. A few other channels where you can sell books. There's the Book Scatter program where you can sell back to the students and other companies. They immediately pay you a certain amount of money. So that's another way to get rid of books. And one other company that I want to mention, advertise here, is called Getita. Getita is a company that recoups all the fees that Amazon kind of loses for you. So anytime Amazon damages your books, anytime Amazon loses your books or any of your inventory, Getita will recoup your money back. They only take 25% of the money that they recoup. And this is kind of the success story of the business. I just want to share some of the numbers here. We have 3 curves here. The red curve is the revenue curve. So I started with the company in the middle of 2016. And as you can see, the revenue kind of grew almost exponentially. And in part, why that was the case is because I started small. I started with the books that I knew were great ROI. They were very popular. Kind of your best books at first to be sure that I would sell them. And as I grew the business, I created a greater breadth. Obviously, books that are not as good in ROI, but still profitable. And that enabled me to grow my revenue base tremendously. Now, as you can see the orange curve, that's the ROI. And you can see that it's actually declining over the 3 years that I worked there. And part of the reason for that is, as I mentioned, that as you increase your breadth of books, there are different kinds of books, and as you grow your breadth, there's less ROI books that are included in the mix. So that's part of the reason why ROI shrunk. But the other component is of competition. So there's obviously more and more competitors that came on board over the 3 years. Some of them, as I already mentioned, we sued them. So there's more competition to be involved in. But interestingly enough, the profits over the 3 years, as you can see, almost grew linearly. So At the end of 3 years, the profit was about $4 million in this particular channel for my company. And it's a great boost and bonus. And one thing that I definitely want to encourage everyone here is that you can do it yourself as well, using many other products. It doesn't have to be books. All right. Now we can have time for questions. Anyone have questions? Yes, sir?
One moment, I'll wait for the mic. Thank you so much for your presentation. First question is, what is the revenue distribution among channels, among online channels, between platforms you use? I have a lot of questions. Maybe
Sure.
I will ask only 3 ones, and let's ask them one by one.
One at a time. Okay,
Yeah.
yes, no, great question. So, yeah, first question that was asked is, how much of what proportion was the Amazon channel part of that curve? And Amazon is the lion's share. I want to say 85 to 90%. There are other channels such as eBay, and and there's a few other specialty dedicated channels for books, like McKinsey Books. But Amazon comprises 85 to 90%. And if you were to ask me, Boris, what's the trend over those 3 years? Amazon is taking greater and greater part of that proportion. So it's literally squeezing out everyone out, including eBay. eBay, in fact, is almost out. They increased the pricing for selling books. Yeah.
What is the frequency of price updates on Amazon, and does it discourage customers from purchasing while they see the price change too often, even they haven't made a final decision to purchase?
Great question. So how frequent does the price change on Amazon? So as I mentioned to everyone, price changing on Amazon, at least at the current moment, is not the same speed as the way it changes in the stock market, which is in milliseconds. On Amazon, on average, as I already mentioned, it changes about 2.5 minutes. Every 2.5 minutes, the price changes. But for some of the key titles, the price changes literally within 10 seconds. So I discovered one of the things that I'm building in private is a repricer. I discovered a way how you can change pricing in literally under 10 seconds. So for many of the books that we sell, the price changes within 10 seconds if there's competition. Yeah.
Is it dramatically change? Is it dramatically change or not very significant?
Yes. So good question. So most of the price changes are not significant. They're typically changes in maybe 50 cents, 70 cents. But I still have plenty of customers who literally tell me the following thing. Well, I bought your book a week ago and it was $10 more. Can I return it, or can you give me a $10 refund? So for most of those customers, I do not do that favor because they obviously needed it a week ago. So there's value to having them book a week earlier. But if the price changed dramatically within a day, I typically give them some money back. Yeah, those are rare instances. But yes, you should know, in general, the price literally tanks or goes much less after the rush season is over. So you can get the same book 30 to 40% cheaper after the rush season is over. Yeah.
And maybe the last question. Have you built a regression model which models maybe regression or a binary classifier who inferences whether the book will be presented in BuyBox? So you mentioned that you understand which metrics does Amazon use to place to decide whether to put your book in a BuyBox. Yeah. Have you built the regression model, and is it working?
Yes, and a great question. Yes, so of course I built and tested the model for all those variables, how they fit into the one final formula. One thing that I will caution to you about this idea is that Amazon itself changes the formula and the variables, not necessarily the variables, but the weight of the variables in that formula. As you can imagine, Amazon is in the business of making as much profit as they can. They make profit when you make profit. So when you sell, they still make profit. So it's in their interest to keep the price as high as possible because they take a certain percentage. They take, I want to say about 21, 22% cut of all the sales, and obviously they sell themselves. So it's obvious in their advantage to keep the price as high as possible. But on the other hand, if they have too much inventory, let's say Amazon bought 1,000 books of a certain title and they haven't sold it, they need to get rid of it. So they will lower the price. So there's definitely, if you were to ask me, Boris, has the formula for the buy box changed over those 3 years? I'll tell you absolutely. It definitely changes. There's one interesting idea that I will tell you. It's called cluster algorithm. So now one of the key things that BuyBox looks at is if you stick out of the pricing range, let's say everybody's selling the book for around $100 and you sell it for $80, you're not going to be in the BuyBox, even though you're the cheapest. So they like people to be in the clusters. You want to be in a cluster.
Have you tried or do you use multiple accounts for the same company, multiple merchant accounts to fit all the
Yes.
all the places in the
Yeah.
BuyBox? Or
Yes, great question. Yes, I actually, in fact, had several accounts on Amazon to play with the BuyBox strategy, absolutely. Even though Amazon a little bit frowns upon that, it's not really legal, but you can get away with several accounts by saying on one account only it's going to primarily sell new books, another one used books, but yeah, you can have a little bit of intermingle. Yes, absolutely.
thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good question.
Thank you. That's very good review, very practical one.
Yes.
So 2 questions. First of all, do you see Amazon signing more direct agreements with textbook publishers, and where you are planning for that use case? And second one, where you considered using your strategy to other categories on Amazon?
Yeah, great questions. So let's tackle one at a time. Do I foresee additional pacts that Amazon will have with other publishers? Yes, because Amazon is trying to cut out the middleman in a certain sense with the publishing companies. And I actually lived through one, as I mentioned, through Cengage. And what happened with Cengage, most of those books used to sell at only, at most, maybe 30% off list price. So they were selling at a very high price. After Amazon kind of made that pact with Cengage, the prices you would see on a brand new book, 50% off. So absolutely, it destroyed the previous models. You had to be aware of it. You had to rebuild the model. You had to be much more cautious about the books that you buy. As the most recent development, I don't know if you've heard about it, Cengage and McGraw-Hill have merged. So yes, that's the most recent development. How will that impact the pricing? That's yet to be seen. But in general, with Cengage, what happened is that the rentals became very cheap, so that diminished the velocity of how many books you should buy. So yes, it definitely plays into the modeling effort. And what was the other second question that you had?
Well, and what you're planning to do about that? Because Amazon will drop the mark.
Perfect question. So actually, one of my business partners, he sells other items. As you can imagine, you're not limited to books, and actually it's wise to diversify yourself. You don't have to sell just books. There's other categories such as shoes. You want to pick a category which is going to always have a demand. So as Alex mentioned, you're going to have customers. So shoes is one of very popular customers, and jewelry as well. So yes, you can definitely apply all this data to other categories, but just to give you a word of caution, in other categories there's different number of competitors, and the Amazon ranking in other categories does not mean the same as it does in books. So that 2000 ranking in books might be a great ranking, but in shoes it might not be as good of a ranking. So that it's like a business acumen they have to know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But all the data is available. Yeah.
Спасибо, Борис, за выступление. Давайте поаплодируем.